Was Ötzi really murdered, or did nature deliver a slower, crueler death? What if Ötzi didn't die in a hail of violence, but in agonizing cold? Decades of forensic sleuthing say the Iceman's wounds may not have killed him, but immobilization plus exposure likely did. Here's a deeper, more nuanced reconstruction of Ötzi's final hours, open questions, evolving evidence, and one shocking conclusion. Did Ötzi die from the arrow lodged in his shoulder, or was his fate sealed by the alpine cold after he was wounded? This question has haunted researchers. Was his death quick, violent, and retaliatory? Or protracted, tragic, and defined by nature's cruelty rather than human malice? On the 19th of September 1991, two hikers stumbled upon a figure half buried in melting ice at 10,500 feet in the Alps, right on the border of Austria and Italy. At first, it looked like a tragic accident from recent times, but radiocarbon dating soon revealed the shocking truth. This man had died over 5,000 years ago, around 3,300 BCE. He was about 45 years old, stood 5'3", and had somehow endured the brutal world of the Copper Age until his mysterious end. Early forensic studies zeroed in on one striking detail: an arrowhead lodged near his left shoulder blade, with a deep wound tearing into the tissue. X-rays and CT scans of the 1,990 seconds suggested the arrow had pierced a major artery, the subclavian, leading scientists to a dramatic conclusion. The Iceman, as he came to be known, hadn't simply frozen to death. He had been hunted down, shot, and killed in an act of sudden violence. For years, this became the story the world believed. Ötzi died quickly, bleeding out on the high mountain pass. In 2025, a team of forensic specialists, led by Villa, Larson, Zink, and Linnerup, took a bold step, revisiting the Iceman's wounds with tools that simply didn't exist a decade ago. Using refined CT scans, high-resolution 3D segmentation, and volumetric modeling, they reconstructed Ötzi's injuries as if the 5,000-year-old body were once again alive. What they found was striking. Hidden within the tissues of his shoulder, they identified a hematoma, a deep internal bruise holding about 110 milliliters of blood. Painful, yes. Serious, certainly. But not the catastrophic blood loss that would have killed him within minutes. Instead, it suggested a man who was gravely wounded but still clinging to life. The arrow's path also gained new clarity. Through 3D animations, researchers mapped the projectile's entry, the tearing of skin, the fracturing of scapula, and the partial laceration of an artery. But it only made sense if his arm was raised forward, as though bracing or perhaps fleeing. These reconstructions shift the story from a clean assassination to a far more haunting scene of struggle, posture, and pain. For decades, Ötzi's skull told a troubling story. Early examinations revealed depressions and fractures, evidence, some argued, of a brutal blow delivered by another human hand. To many, this seemed to fit neatly into the murder narrative. The arrow in his back, the wound in his shoulder, and now, perhaps, a final strike to the head. But newer investigations have begun to soften that interpretation. High-resolution imaging and careful consideration of the alpine terrain suggest another possibility, one less cinematic, but no less tragic. What if the injuries came not from a weapon, but from the merciless mountains themselves? Picture a man already weakened, collapsing on jagged stone, his fall cushioned only by a fur cap and layers of hide. The headgear may have absorbed part of the impact, but not enough to spare him from a fractured skull and lingering trauma. Rather than proof of an execution-style killing, the evidence now whispers of a lonely accident in the ice, a reminder that in the high Alps, the ground itself can be as deadly as any human foe. If the arrow in the fractured skull did not kill Ötzi outright, then something else had to finish what those wounds began. Increasingly, Experts believe it was not violence, but nature itself that sealed his fate. High on the unforgiving Alps, the real enemy was exposure. With an injured shoulder, possible head trauma, and no chance to descend quickly, Ötzi's body was trapped in a cruel equation: pain plus immobility, multiplied by freezing wind and falling temperature. Hypothermia works slowly, almost invisibly, draining strength in silence. First comes the shivering, the numb fingers, the fatigue. Then the mind begins to falter. Confusion creeps in, decision-making collapses, and even the will to seek shelter fades. Hours in that state can be as deadly as any blade or arrow. For Ötzi, the cold may have been less dramatic than a violent death, but no less merciless. His final hours were likely defined by a long, drawn-out struggle, his body weakening against the chill, his mind dimming, until the mountains claimed him for good. What lingers most about Ötzi's death are not the things we know, but the shadows of what we don't. How long did he survive after the arrow pierced his shoulder? Was he still able to walk stumbling across jagged stone in search of safety, or did his strength collapse within minutes? The newest forensic models suggest hours may have passed, hours in which he fought pain, cold, and disorientation while the mountains pressed in on him. And then there is the human question. Was he alone in this tragedy? The angle of the shot hints at an attacker positioned higher, as if waiting, or perhaps striking from concealment. Was it an ambush, a dispute turned deadly, or a cruel accident? No document, no artifact can tell us for sure. Even the weather itself remains an unknown. Was the wind howling? Was night falling? Was there any chance of shelter nearby? These variables, impossible to reconstruct, could mean everything. In that uncertainty lies the enduring mystery. Ötzi's death was shaped not only by violence, but by forces we may never fully untangle. So, what truly claimed Ötzi's life? The evidence now paints a layered, tragic chain of events. An arrow struck him, but it was not the instant killer once imagined. He likely fell, perhaps struck his head, his body weakened, and his movements slowed. Alone in the unforgiving Alps, the cold did what the wound could not, draining his strength, blurring his mind, locking his body in place. His death was not a single violent moment, but a cascade, injury leading to vulnerability, vulnerability yielding to exposure, and exposure sealing his fate. In the end, nature delivered the cruelest blow. Ötzi's remains have always told multiple stories, and as technology improves, the narratives shift. What seemed once a simple tale of murder becomes far more complex and human. It's not just about who did him in, but how the elements, the land, the body, and the moment conspired. If you're like us at Prehistoric Shadows, you'll find this revelation haunting. It forces us to reckon with how fragile life was, and still is, when the environment is against you. And how even in prehistoric times, suffering could be prolonged, messy, and shaped by forces beyond one's control. If this story moved you, share it with someone who loves mysteries of the past. Hit subscribe to walk more lost paths with Prehistoric Shadows. And consider this: next time you feel powerless in rough weather, remember Ötzi, not just the Iceman, but a person who, despite injury, tried to survive. History isn't just about the strong or victorious, it's about those moments of vulnerability we often gloss over.